Hi, and welcome to the latest in our Gardener Tech video series. Today we're looking at one of my favorite topics, which is the idea of looking at cloud as a tactical use. So not the idea of that we move everything that we've got into public cloud, but where we use public cloud to deliver tactically things that are difficult for us to do on premises. One of the key areas that we find cloud really good for doing that is in terms of backup and archive and data protection. One of the things that's very difficult to do on-prem is that when we want to maintain lots and lots of archives, lots and lots of data, is how do we continue to scale our on-premises infrastructure to allow us to do that? So we're going to look at some ways that we can integrate public cloud into our infrastructures so that we can maintain the same kind of front end that we used to, but take cloud and use it where it's powerful to do so. And to do that, we're going to be talking with Veeam today. And joining me to discuss that, I've got Anthony Spiteri, who's a senior global technologist at Veeam. Hi, Anthony. How are you? You doing well?
Hey mate, how you doing? Pretty good, actually. Pretty good.
Great stuff. Well, thanks for joining us today, and thanks for sharing kind of what Veeam are doing in this space and how their technology can help us to exploit cloud to give us some improved data protection and mobility of data. So, do you want to maybe before you start, introduce yourself, what you do, and then talk to us a little bit about what Veeam are doing?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. My name's Anthony Spiteri. I'm a senior global technologist in the product strategy team at Veeam. Our job really in product strategy is to be the conduit, I suppose, between the field and our R&D, but also be the spearheads of the technical information and really attack the TDM, the technical decision makers in the industry. So we really are engaging with the community, and this is why we love doing things like this. And thanks, Paul, for having us on. Today Paul's asked me to come in and talk a little bit about how do you think about the data that's sitting traditionally on premises as your backup data, understanding that this data continually is growing and data is growing at an exponential rate. How do you then tactically manage that data moving forward when you want to comply with maybe some more regulations which have come down in the last couple of years? Data has to grow, but it can't live on premises holistically anymore. So, we're going to talk about a few things in V10 that have come out to help organizations deal with that. And really, that's more of a follow-up into what we released in our last major release, which was update 4 for backup replication 9.5, which released in January of 2019. So, we'll talk about the V10 feature called the Cloud Tier and move from there. So, we wanted to look firstly at, I guess, what Veeam is doing with regards to cloud data management as a whole. And, this is our vision in terms of how we are positioning the platform today. And, Paul, when you look at it, it starts with data. I mean, data is so critical. And the one thing that Veeam and everyone that knows Veeam is big about is that we say that the data is your data. Okay, so we're not going to take ownership of the data. Being software-driven, hardware agnostic, the notion that the data is yours for the lifespan of the data in its existence is more pertinent with Veeam than ever. When you look at where the data is living now, when you look at this image, we know that data lives on the private cloud these days. That's where it's been traditionally, but we're more and more shifting in the public cloud. And everyone knows that now, right? It's an accepted fact that the spread of data where it lives is fundamentally different to where it was, even say five years ago, as recent as that. But more recently, with situations that have popped up in the world, as we're talking at the beginning of 2020, we understand that sprawl of data and where data is being created actually goes beyond now the private cloud and the public cloud, because now a lot of this data is almost decentralized everywhere, not just at the edge, but in everyone's home. So more and more important, we've got to think about how we manage that data. And if we look around the circle here, it all starts with backup and recovery. It's still something that Veeam is so strong on, fundamental to our core platform, the fact that you can back up really easy and you can recover easily as well. We talk about governance and compliance, which goes into, I think, what Paul is talking about here in terms of where the data sits and why we're looking to move archival data out and solve those problems. Orchestration and automation. How do you, I guess, orchestrate the tiering of that data from on-premises to the cloud? Monitoring analytics is all about, understanding where that data is when it sits, when it actually is moved, where is it eventually going to sit, and how do you then have visibility of that? More importantly, though, and I think what we're going to talk about with regards to the Cloud Tier feature in V10 is mobility of the data. How do you know that you can move it from point A to point B and still have it, number one, accessible, have it efficiently stored, but also how do you bring it back and use that data? So yeah, I mean, that's what we're looking at with the cloud data management platform. Paul, do you have any comments about this or any questions at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I think is fundamental with the way we look at data in the modern world, as we build kind of, and I like to talk to people a lot about the idea of building data strategy. So this is as opposed to a generic IT strategy where we're maybe looking at IT from how we deal with IT security, how we build servers and storage, how we integrate cloud, all that kind of thing. It is to build your strategies the other way around and to look at fundamentally data at its core and understand how you want to use the data and the information that you can gather from it and build your platform to replicate that. And I think this slide actually that you're sharing here sums that up really, really well, in that data is absolutely at the center of this, how we want to use it, where it needs to live, and what kind of tools and policies and processes we need are all secondary to the fact that actually it's how do we get the best out of our data? How do we make sure we're utilizing it well? How do we make sure it's secure? How do we make sure it's protected? And you build the rest of your infrastructure around that. And I think that's absolutely core. And one of the things you talked about, which again I think is hugely important, is that idea of mobility. Any kind of modern data strategy that we build, the importance of being able to move our data to where we need it, when we need it, again, hugely critical. And when you talked about we're recording this event in March of 2020, so lots of people were familiar with kind of what's happening right now. But one of the things that we've seen is hugely critical in terms of allowing people to operate business as near to usual as they can is that kind of mobility of data and mobility of services. So so I think that kind of cloud data management strategy that Veeam have fits perfectly in with kind of the conversations that certainly many of our Gardener Systems customers are having.
Yeah, and I guess the great thing about this is that this is real. This is what, when you see the technologies and the platform as a whole, what you see on the screen here isn't just a vision. It's actually put into practice with a lot of the technologies, the features, the enhancements that we have. So, Cloud Tier is one of those. So as we look at the features, in V10, we had 150 plus features, but we had 3 top line features that we went to market with when we released V10, and that was build around enhanced instant VM recovery, enhanced NAS backup, which I believe you covered with Michael Cade in another episode, and then enhanced object storage support based on our Cloud Tier technology, which we actually released into the market, and again, update 4. In V10, what we've done is we've enhanced that even further to help customers get to that ultimate goal of full cloud mobility and data protection, and making it more efficient, dealing with that growth of data that we talked about. In this day and age, it's even more important. When we look at what's come in V10, we've added a copy mode to it, and I'll talk about why that's important in the next couple of slides. Effectively, a copy mode that lets you copy almost instantaneously data that was stored locally on a local repository on premises, copy that up to an object storage repository somewhere else. Okay, and have a one-to-one copy of that in a cloud platform. Again, leveraging cloud technologies, leveraging the infinite scalability of platforms like Amazon S3 and Azure Blob. Really cool stuff there. And then what we did as well is we added immutability to it, because not only are we thinking about the fact that you've got to put the data and make it more efficient and shift it from an on-premises location to a cloud storage somewhere, but you also want to secure it. And we've done that in conjunction with Amazon S3 and their immutability features. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then resiliency. And the resiliency really comes into play here, and something that differentiates this particular feature from other competitive features that are out there. The fact that we've thought about how you make something like this absolutely resilient and smart. So that means that if you have a event on premises, you can actually recover all the data regardless if you've got a lot of the data sitting in the object storage. We also do some resiliency where we copy metadata and archive indexes to basically give you the ability to reconstruct that in a fresh location and do it quickly and efficiently as well. So that's where we've come into play here with the object storage support. I mentioned that we released this first in update 4, which was last year. When we released it in update 4, we had a particular policy. So here you can see our 2 policies that are current as of V10. In update 4, we only had the move policy. And this was good. And fundamentally what the move did was shift data from more expensive local storage to cheap object storage, okay? The thing about this though, the data was either locally on the on-premises location, or it was in the capacity tier. So it was one or the other. And what that meant is that there was a small chance that if there was a disaster on premises, you might lose a subset of data. Now that was okay because for what that particular policy did with regards to making the local storage or the repo more efficient, making it easier to manage, that's primarily what it achieved. In V10, we added this copy mode, which effectively covers the possibility of a local disaster and losing some of that data, whether it be on premises or in the object storage. With copy mode, it's copied right away. As soon as the backup jobs create the data locally, it's copied instantaneously to the object storage repository. So that's the difference between the move and copy mode. And we're going to show a demo later, where I'll show you exactly where this is all kind of played in, how you actually configure it. We can do that because we've got smart with regards to the way that we store our data. So the Veeam portable data format is one of our biggest differentiators. And in that format, we have a couple of different constructs. We have the idea of metadata and actual backup data. So metadata is a reference to the backup data, as you'd expect metadata to be. But this is a self-descripting file, self-describing, which means that it's completely portable in itself. So you can take this VBK file and copy it from one storage to another, and it'll still work. So that's the idea of portability that we talked about, and mobility at the actual core of our structure and how we store the data. Now within that, what we've done for the cloud tier is that we effectively strip out, in the move mode, we can strip out that metadata and data and shift it into the object storage and leave a dehydrated VBK locally in the case of the move mode. So we've really made it smart to be able to limit what data is actually being stored locally, make it more efficient, while moving the important stuff for longer term retention, which makes it cheaper long term, which makes it potentially more safer long term. That's kind of the idea behind it.
And I guess, Andy, just a quick question there, that because you're just using metadata to do that kind of description on-prem within your kind of your immediate tier, what makes that so portable is because that data is going to be relatively small.
Yeah, so that metadata, if you've got a file, I've used the example since always talking about this, that if you've got like a 1 terabyte VBK file and you strip all the data out, you're going to be left with about 22 megabytes worth of metadata. Okay, that's on the move. Okay, so that means that it's really making everything more efficient. And the great thing about this, which we're not going to really go into in any great detail in this particular presentation, but maybe Paul, you can list to some show notes that we did from Tech Field Day, where we deep dive into this technology. But effectively, to recover the data, we stream it. We don't restage it, because we break it down into small chunks and upload it as objects into the object storage and what we call the capacity tier. We have an archive index which knows what blocks of data have been uploaded. We don't upload the same blocks of data twice, so we're effectively getting even more efficiencies through effective source side DG in that block index. When it comes time to recover the data, we don't need to recover everything. We don't need to stage the data. So a lot of competitive solutions will actually, upload to the cloud, upload to an archive tier. They need to pull everything back. They've got to bring everything back holistically, the whole 1 terabyte. Whereas with this, the way we've designed it, because we're only basically looking at the blocks of data that are referenced, we only pull what we need and stream it from object storage directly. So pretty smart in that case.
Yeah, and I think that delivers two really important features. I mean, one is when you want to recover data, what you don't want to be doing is having a long drawn out process. You want to be able to start to recover that stuff really quickly. And going back to something you talked about before, that idea of portability, obviously one of the biggest challenges with data portability is it has weight, it has gravity, as people like to describe it. So if we're moving 10 terabytes takes time. But if what we're trying to do is offer portability of our data, then if we're moving big 10 terabyte lumps, or however big that lump of data is going to be all of the time, then that's going to be a big, slow process and makes portability quite hard. If what we've got is some efficiency that allows us to present the data, but without the need to move bigger lumps of it all of the time, that's a hugely effective capability.
Yeah, and that's all about RTOs, right? Understanding that the RTO is, you need to get it as small as possible to achieve critical data restoration time. And the fact that you don't need to pull everything down to start with saves you an immense amount of time initially, and then you can actually get to the important stuff of recovering that data. And one of the great things here as well is you don't lose much functionality. In fact, you don't lose any functionality with regards to being able to do recoverability functions. So no matter if the data is moved or copied up to the object storage repository, you can then do all Veeam actions on it. You can right click and do an instant VM recovery. You can actually stream an instant VM recovery, which is a demo that I've done many times now over the past 2 years, but it still makes for a great demo where you're actually streaming an instant VM recovery onto a vSphere or a Hyper-V, and basically having the VM run with the blocks being streamed from object storage from Amazon S3 or from Azure Blob. Pretty crazy technology that you can do that, right? But we've achieved that, all in software. But then you can do right-click and you can recover the VMDK, you can recover the whole VM, or you can actually do direct recovery to EC2 or to Azure as well through our restore functionality. So this really great functionality that you don't lose because of the way that we've actually designed and architected it. So this just shows you that the primary difference between both policies, when we're looking at, and again, Paul, you mentioned longer term archival storage, the copy mode really looks at the latest copies of the data, and then says how long do you want to keep it off-site on premises, locked away from the on-premises location. That's important. The move mode really looks at the older stub files and says how can we make our on-premises location more efficient. That's the biggest difference between the two, basically. And when we look at it in a whole overview, I must mention that you do need scale-up backup repository. So those that know Veeam know about our scale-up backup repository technology, which is effectively a software-defined storage top-level namespace where you have a performance tier and a capacity tier. The performance tier can be backed by any storage, be it direct attach, NAS, DG appliance, iSCSI, it doesn't really matter. They become extents. And the idea there is you just keep on adding these extents to create a bigger and bigger scale backup repository, but you present to your backup jobs the one top level namespace, okay? With the capacity tier, that's a single external repository that lives and is backed by an object storage repository. And when we see the demo, that'll make a little bit more sense. We have a ton of names for this. It's a little bit confusing. I've even got a what's it called, a glossary of terms, would you believe, for this, because we needed it. So it's just something that we've basically had to develop, but that's basically what it is. So performance tier, capacity tier, data first comes and sits on the performance tier, and then is either moved or copied to the capacity tier, which is backed by an object storage repository. You can turn on immutability if you want. It's all policy based. It all works quite well. So, in a nutshell, this is what it does. It looks more complicated than what it is. And we'll basically see in the demo how easy it is to set up and what it actually does do.
Yeah, and I think, and again, I think this actually describes really well that something that I kind of started with our introduction to this event was the idea of this tactical use of cloud, so that we take something that we do and we know when we use in our current enterprise, it's kind of a traditional is probably not quite the right word for it, but a way we understand, something we're familiar with, and we take that. But we utilize cloud where cloud's good, so cloud's great at giving us scale, cloud's great at giving us commercial flexibility as well as technical flexibility as we grow the size of our repository. It gives us that ability to, and certainly one of the things that we've seen a lot of recently has been this requirement to, how do I get my data off-site when I can no longer operate the off-siting process in a way that I could operate it 3 or 4 weeks ago. And there's been a lot of interest in how can I use public cloud as a way of automatically getting my data off-site into another location. And I think when you tie that into the simplicity of recovery, the flexibility of recovery, so the idea that we can move the kind of metadata that sits in that performance tier and make that relatively portable, I think this is a really, really good example of how we can use cloud as a tactical solution to solve an on-prem problem. So
I love that tactical word.
Yeah, and I think this
I love the technicality. Yeah, I think also what we're finding with this is that people are using this in really weird and wonderful ways as well, and people are legitimately using this as a migration strategy and migration tool as well. Because as soon as you copy the data in, the portability and the mobility of it means you can actually recover it somewhere else fairly quickly. And where I've seen personal traction in this is in VMware Cloud and AWS. So we've got a solution out there, it's a joint solution between Veeam and Amazon, where we basically put out a reference architecture which shows an on-demand recovery for a VMC situation. So, I wouldn't actually call it, we sort of started to call it a poor man's DR in a sense, right? How do you leverage technology tactically, like you were saying, to reach an outcome. And the outcome here was that people didn't want to pay to have a standby software-defined data center, which costs money on VMC, sitting there waiting for use, right, and having data living there. So the fact that you can have all of your VM workloads sitting in a capacity tier, which is an object storage repository, say in Amazon S3, waiting there for some situation, for a disaster, then to be called to use only when you need it on demand. That was where that kind of idea came from. So again, we never really thought about some particular use cases for this technology until it got out there, and we started to sort of put A and B together and started trying to work out exactly how they would marry up. So you're right, in this day and age when people are looking for slightly different solutions to older problems, new technology is certainly there to help, and this is one of those technologies, I think.
Yeah, I think I'd agree, and you know, and one of the phrases that I think we're all learning currently is the idea of flexibility. You know, so and I think as the world becomes more flexible, and public cloud's a big driver for that, isn't it? It gives us, you know, one of the big benefits of public cloud is that ability to have that technical and commercial flexibility to present an infrastructure as and when we need it, and then remove that infrastructure when we've finished. But often one of the things that gets forgotten about that, because doing that with compute is one thing, compute and applications, but doing that with masses of data is something else. So
Yeah.
any technologies that, again, going back to that kind of tactical idea, any technologies that give us that tactical portability, that we can start to put data in the places where we might need it and can present it quickly in those places, and potentially remove it from those places again when we've done, you know, I think is hugely valuable. So this is
Yeah.
probably a good time, I think, maybe to kind of demonstrate a little bit about what
Yeah.
capacity and cloud tier look
More
like,
demo.
so people can
Top
kind of
right.
get a flavor for it.
Yeah, good stuff. Very bright on the screen. There we go. It's adjusted now. So yeah, so look, it's simple, right? As we go through here, we're not going to go through an end-to-end demo, but effectively, you know, this is a V10 backup replication server. You can see here that I've actually got a pre-configured Amazon S3 backup repository. So if I actually go and add a backup repository, the thing that we released in update 4 and subsequently enhanced in V10 was this object storage tab here. So from here, we've got the ability to add an object storage repository of these types. And you can see here that, you know, we've got Amazon S3, Azure Blob, S3 compatible. So obviously we're not just saying go public hyperscale. If you're running object storage on your own, if you're running a Cloud EN, Ceph, you know, name your Minio, name your flavor, basically you can still do it and still have the ability to leverage the technology. And then IBM Cloud as well. So if you went and actually did that, looking at the example of an Amazon S3 backed one, so if you go in here, it's a pretty simple setup, takes a couple of clicks, you add your AWS account, select your data center region, and here's where you will add the actual details of the Amazon S3 bucket as it comes up. Hopefully it works there, cool. So you can see how this one is living in Ohio. You choose a bucket. You can give it a limit. Obviously the cloud isn't a charity. We'll have to say that at Veeam. So, you know, and because it is in effect, you know, infinitely scalable, you can actually start to charge yourselves a lot of money. So we're giving people the ability to limit it in some way, which is pretty smart. Here's the part in V10, which makes the immutability stick. So here you can see make recent backups immutable for X amount of days, okay? And again, what this means is this leverages Amazon S3's object lock technology and versioning. We basically trigger that via an API call when we upload the blocks. And we set an immutability flag on every block that we upload based on this, okay? And again, this just protects it from malicious use. Ransomware, yes, but we see it more as malicious use. A dodgy admin doing something bad, even an admin that maybe in his first day doesn't know what he's doing and tries to delete something and geez, now it's all gone. Or someone who actually wants to do some malicious hurt to the company. With this on, there's no way, even if you've got an Amazon root access account, there's actually no way you can delete the data. You have to actually ask Amazon to delete it. So it's a pretty strong sort of immutability feature there. So once you've configured that, you then come to the Scarlet Backup repository here. And you can see here that I've got one configured already. Now, Scarlet Backup repository, when you configure it, you configure the performance tier, which is what we've talked about. It's that local landing zone. And that typically can be any traditional storage that you've got. I guess one of the big things that we're trying to push and what we're seeing in terms of mindset is that because you can now offload the majority of your longer term data to the cloud, to an object storage repository, you can keep that local performance tier relatively thin. And because of that, we've seen some people go and use more high capacity SSDs to actually get that performance, like real performance, out of your local repository, which people haven't been able to do up until this point because it was always too expensive to run, to expand the growth of local storage, continuing to grow it on SSD wasn't going to work. But now with the ability and the mindset that you can actually offload that data, the majority of it to the object storage, we're seeing a lot more uptake of that SSD. Place and policy, that's traditionally what it is with Scala Backup Repository, but the capacity tier here is what we're talking about. So we can go and extend the Scala Backup Repository to object storage repository. And then you basically, on the list, you select the one that we created earlier. You then say whether you want a copy policy or you want the move policy. So you can have one or the other, doesn't really matter. If you've got the move policy in play, you have to set a further policy which dictates your operational restore window. And the operational restore window is basically the age of the data before it is a candidate to be moved out. Okay. And if you remember earlier, I talked about the difference between the two modes, and I mentioned that the move mode, there was a potential for, in the case of a disaster, for you to not have data, to have data loss. This is why, because you're only looking at data after 14 days being moved. If you created data before that in the operational restore window, before 14 days, and you had a disaster, it's not going to be moved up to the object storage repository. That's where the copy mode comes into play, and where they both work beautifully together. With the copy mode, we're effectively leveraging the real 3-2-1 rule of backup, which means 3 copies of your data, 2 media types, but 1 holistic copy off-site. That's where the copy mode comes into play. That's pretty clear, isn't it, Paul? Have you got any comments around that in terms of how it's all configured?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Actually, just kind of thinking, and it's a good point to point out that the idea of that move backup, where you are moving data based on age and usage, is to ensure that if you're going to use this and you need disaster recovery, that actually that performance tier is highly available and available in other locations, if or at least be able to be recovered into other locations if need be. So, and I think certainly one of the things that we're increasingly seeing is that what the copy element allows us to do is to automate a process that historically has been, a tricky process for people, hasn't it? The idea that I need to take tapes, for example, or USB devices or some other kind of media and move it somewhere to an off-site storage location or whatever that might look like. So, again, using cloud tactically to do something that we find potentially more difficult or more challenging on-prem, which is to say, well, why don't we just take advantage of public cloud and make that an automatic off-site repository? And like you said, actually fits in really well with that kind of 3-2-1 backup process that we like to talk about, and making sure
it's all policy. It's policy driven on the tiering, right? And that's kind of where it exists, from disk to disk to cloud to glacier, to deeper cloud and all that kind of stuff. And then eventually it's still going to be on tape, at some point. So I think that's the idea here. The idea here is for us to continue to add tiering levels. At the moment, it goes to S3. It goes to infrequent access, or in Azure, it goes to the archive sort of colder tier in Azure. As we develop this technology, we'll push it to Glacier, and then we'll push it even further down. Deep freeze, I think they've got now, which I forgot how cheap that was. It was like 1 cent per terabyte or something crazy like that, right? So that's the idea here, is to continue to make exactly what you talk about more transparent to the customer, okay? And they can actually do it based on policy, as opposed to having to think about it and then potentially manually do an action on the data. That's pretty much where it sits. So yeah, just to finish it off, it's really that easy to configure. And then obviously when you've got the job configured, you then have all your data points, and you can see here we've got data points now sitting and restore points in object storage. And these are all sitting in object storage here. So now what we'll do is we'll actually go look at the jobs, and we'll see here that in our backup points, where we list all of our backups that have been done, you can see we've got this object storage tab now, and now you can see all the backup points that live on the actual object storage repository. And if we went into them and dove into them a little bit, you can see if I right click on here, I've still got all the capabilities that I talked about earlier. So instant VM recovery, restore, we can do direct restore to EC2 or Azure. And again, this will stream it directly from the object storage repository if desired, if that's where the data is living. Or in the case of a disaster, think about this where, again, we've had an on-premises disaster situation, we've lost that. All we have to do is reinstall Veeam backup replication again anywhere. It can even be the free community edition actually, and we can then connect the object storage repository as it was, do an import, and then we'll see these restore points and be able to action these recoverability actions against them. So that's pretty cool in itself. The last thing I wanted to show Paul was that use case for immutability. Okay, again, if someone is a dodgy or malicious actor coming in and trying to do some malicious intent, if I want to come in here and actually delete this backup point, let's go in here and actually right click and do delete from disk. So, you know, if I wanted to do damage right here, I've done big damage. I've come in and deleted all these restore points. There's nothing much I could do traditionally about that. But the fact we've got the immutability flag on this particular point should mean that in a couple of seconds, this will show a can't delete error. So there you go. Failed to delete because the backup is marked as immutable until May 5. It's actually giving us a date there is when it's actually immutable. So that's a pretty cool example of how that immutability flag works and what it actually does to protect the data.
Yeah, and I think particularly in a world where data governance is so important, so you're making sure we comply with different regulations wherever we are around the world, and immutability of data is a key factor in that. And also, as you said, that kind of malicious case, whether it's a malicious actor, malicious code, anything that's trying to rewrite data, delete data, you know, that's an extremely powerful capability.
Cool. So yeah, that's basically it. I mean, it's simple to set up, simple to use. I think as we talk about cloud mobility and the ability to look at cloud data management and having control of your data, this particular feature ticks all those boxes. Lets you control what you have locally, lets you be more efficient in terms of storing that data locally, lets you have peace of mind in the fact that you are able to get that data straight away holistically to an offsite location as a whole secondary copy, and have that immutable as well, so it can't be touched, it's protected. And then from a recoverability point of view, knowing that you can rebuild the data set very easily anywhere as long as you've installed Veeam backup replication, then have the ability to recover that data at the same time. So it's kind of like a complete end-to-end solution for me. It's why it's become so popular and why we're seeing a lot of our customers think about not just the use cases that we've presented to them, but off the cuff use cases and you know, that sort of thing.
And for a Veeam customer or somebody who's thinking of being a Veeam customer, is there any particular version of the backup and recovery tools they need? Obviously V10 if they want that kind of copy capability, but is there any particular version they need?
So to have Sober, you do need Enterprise Edition, so Enterprise Plus. So it's more just licensing, okay? So if you're going to scale up backup repository, you need to have Enterprise Plus. So that's really the only limit on it. The software is all the same. For us, it's all the one platform. Backup replication has all these amazing features built into it as a platform.
Well, I do think, and Anthony, appreciate your time on sharing this with us, because I do think it's a really good example of what we talked about in the introduction, which is this idea of tactical cloud use. You know, we're taking kind of the Veeam data protection solution that we know and love, and we're extending it by using cloud to deliver the things that cloud's good at doing. You know, and that, as you talked about in your presentation, you know, the idea that that cannot be private cloud. So if you're delivering your own object storage to do this with a Cloudian or somebody similar, then you've got that ability to plug into their capabilities as well. So, but that's great. I think that's been a really powerful example of how we can use cloud to extend our on-prem data protection capabilities and give us some additional portability. So, Anthony, thank you very, very much for your time, and
cool.
thanks for sharing that with us. And for people who've enjoyed this video, then do please look out for future Gardener Tech videos coming soon.